Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today we are talking about the concept of time. This is from the Great Ideas series. We've done pieces on honor and principles so far, and I look forward to doing, covering most of these ideas. So this is on time. I'm going to start by, this is the table of contents. We're going to start by talking about how poets think about time. We're going to cover, Shakespeare and Milton. They've got completely different approaches to time. We're going to talk about the philosophers talking about time. We're going to talk about Marcus Aurelius, Pascal, and then we're going to talk about different paradoxes of time from Aristotle and Augustine. Then we are going to go into physics and talk about the absolute versus relative time, concepts of Newton and Einstein. Then we are talking about our perception of the present by William James. And then we're going to raise some questions about time. All of this is to present the ideas of past thinkers about time so that we can think about this concept freshly. So let's begin. When you read Shakespeare's sonnets, time appears in it again and again as a predatory villain with whom not only the lover, but all men must contend. His sonnets are full, make a war upon time's tyranny, to stay time's scythe, to preserve whatever of value can be kept from the waste of time, and to prove that love's not time's fool entirely. So he bemoans what time takes away from us and paints that picture in the most powerful way. When you compare him to Milton, Milton's approach is completely different. Milton says, glut thyself with what thy womb devours, he says to time, which is no more than what is false and vain, and merely mortal dross. So little is our loss, so little is thy gain. So what he's saying is that what really matters is eternal. Values that persist over time. So what time takes away is not important. It is relatively less important. So that's a dramatically different view from Shakespeare. The other thing that poets talk about is by making things immortal through poetry. That you're trying to capture, poet making the memory of his beloved immortal through his poem, or art as a way of holding on to things that you value, regardless of how they change. So these are some of the, these are very powerful ideas about time. Now, when you fast forward to philosophers, the approach is very different. Now, it's such a change of gear when you hear Marcus Aurelius. A philosopher like Marcus Aurelius neither defies or despises time. He enjoins himself to accept the mutability of all things as fitting and suitable to universal nature. He asks himself that for thyself also to change is just the same and equally necessary for the universal nature. To him it seems no evil for things to undergo change. Nor is he oppressed by the image of time as a river made up of events which happen in the violent stream. For soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away, and another comes in its place. And this will be carried away too. So there is a serene acceptance in the Stoic philosophy and in Marcus Aurelius of the nature of time and nature of change. considering change as natural, fitting, and acceptance as the proper approach to it. Pascal, too, talks about this. He says that our nature itself, life itself, consists of motion. So how can you complain about nature? How can you complain about change where you yourself are a moving being, a changing being? And he has all kinds of interesting observations about time. He says, we anticipate the future as too slow in coming, or we recall the past to stop too rapid flight. For the present is generally painful to us. Let each one examine his thoughts, and he will find them all occupied with the past and the future. The past and present are our means. The future alone is our end. So we never live, but we hope to live. And as we are always preparing to be happy, it is inevitable that we should never be so. So this is Pascal. Let's talk about Aristotle and Augustine. So one pattern that emerges when you read all of these folks is the human desire for permanence. We want to hold on to something, to make for an eternal now to stand still. Anything that we value, we want to hold on to it. There's also an understanding of human beings as opposed to other animals whose range of perception of time is limited. Thanks to our memory and imagination, our human memory and imagination enables us to encompass time on a scale not possible, much higher than animals, enabling us to reach out to the past and the future and even to the eternal. Now let's talk about Aristotle. So Aristotle says, time, past, present, and future forms a continuous whole. So this is a question about continuity versus discreteness of time. So he says time, past, present, and future forms a continuous whole. But the very nature of a continuous quantity is to be divisible. The present moment, however, the now, which is the link of time and the dividing line between past and future, seems to be an indivisible instant. So this is another very interesting theme that comes up in time of, is it continuous or is it discrete? Okay, this is a huge question. Now, Augustine actually has this entire range of paradoxes about time that he talks about. He says, if we conceive of some point of time which cannot be divided into even further minutest parts of moments, that is the only point that can be called the present. And that point of present flees at such lightning speed from being future to being past that it has no extent of duration at all. Only past time and future time can be called long or short. Only they have duration. But in what sense, Augustine asks, can that which does not exist be long or short? I like this quote of his. The past no longer is, and the future is not yet. So that is Augustine. Now let's fast forward to physics. Now physics folks don't have any problem with time at all. To those who conceive time as mathematical magnitude or as physical dimension, there seems to be no difficulty at all about its definition or a precise statement of its properties. So considered, time appears to be no less intelligible than space, for when it is considered, it is being treated exactly like space. So this is both for Newton and Einstein. Einstein talks about the four-dimensional space-time continuum. But with this agreement, there is still a very profound difference in physics between Newton's conception of time and Einstein's conception of time. Now, I don't know if I can communicate it well, but the way in which Einstein criticizes Newtonian mechanics for its habit of treating time as an independent continuum. So the way in which Newton looks at time or space is that he says there is time and space within which universe operates. So he will say universe is in time and space. Whereas Einstein's notion is that space and time are in universe. So it is a way you have to start with the universe, and then you have to arrive at concept of time and space from there. That's a very profound point. I don't think I'm doing justice to it, but it's a very large issue. There is all kinds of talk about the beginning of time. Does time exist before the universe or come into existence after creation of universe? There are arguments about this, theological arguments of, does time begin when God created the universe? There are physics arguments, with Big Bang. Is there time before Big Bang, or does it begin with Big Bang? So this is another large issue about time. Now, this is my favorite thing on time. In this conversation, mostly in these great ideas, William James is exceptionally brilliant. So I'm going to take time to read his take on time, because what he's doing is that he's actually providing like a psychological base for how you actually experience time and how you can build up the concept of time based on that. William James proposes a solution of the mystery of how time exists, at least how it exists in experience. So he's talking about experience of time. So far as our experience goes, past and future can exist only in the present. But how can these extended parts of time exist in the present if the present is but a fleeting moment without any duration? Gone, as James says, in an instant of becoming, gone in the instant of becoming. His answer is in terms of something he calls the spacious present. So this is the concept of duration. He says, unlike the real present, the spacious present is no knife edge, but a saddleback. It's a saddleback with certain breadth of its own, on which we sit perched, and from which we can look in two directions into time. The unit of composition of our perception of time is a duration, not an instant. A duration with a bow and a stern. So front part and a back part, as it were, a rearward and forward-looking end. It is only as parts of this duration block that relation of succession of one end to the other is perceived. On the basis of some experimental evidence, James estimates that this spacious present may vary in length from a few seconds to probably not more than a minute. It has a vaguely vanishing backward and forward fringe, but its nucleus is probably a dozen seconds or less that have just elapsed. The irreversible flow of time, the succession of moments which constitute the motion of the future through present into the past, occurs in this spacious present or duration, though not, according to James, without the accompaniment of observed or experienced change. Awareness of change is the condition on which our perception of time's flow depends. This is again kind of the relative notion. It's measured, human being doing the measurement of time. But that awareness must take place in the spacious present with its contents perceived as having one part earlier and the other part later. In consequence, James considers the spacious present to be not only the original intuition of time, but also the original paragon, prototype of all conceived times. So he's considering, he places duration as the foundation of experience of time and measurement of time, and all other parts as being all other quantities as being related to that as our way of thinking about time. All right, now what I want to do is, this is a very quick romp through various points, various thoughts on time. Now, what I want to do, what I've found, I've been running these discussions on 103 Great Ideas for the past 5 years. What I've found is that most thoughtful people, firstly, these ideas, even if you're not familiar with any of these thinkers or what they have said about a particular idea, all the great ideas are ideas that are foundational to all our thinking. So regardless of whether you have read them or not, these are the ideas you actually use. And if you're reflective about it, if you're thoughtful about it, you will have things to say about it. So what I would like to do is, I would like to now go to breakout rooms so you guys can discuss things that have been presented, but I want to focus on three, when we come back for takeaways, I want to focus on the following questions. So firstly, I want to look at, past, present, and future, and then your general observations. So what do you think is a proper attitude towards the past? How do you make the most of the present? How do you think about the future? And takeaways from the meetup. Also think about the views on times that have not been expressed during this time. Everything that I've talked about, I've tried to do a summary of this chapter on time. But it's always important to know what is being missed, because a lot has happened since 1900. In some concepts, you would find that nothing much has happened since then. In some concepts, you find that a lot has happened since then. So the question would be, what is it? What thoughts on time we have now, which you would like to add to the great conversation? All right, so I'm going to start the breakout rooms. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. All right, so folks, next we are going to do takeaways, but we're going to do it in a very structured way, because I want to have a deep conversation about time. So we're going to do it in 4 stages. First, everybody gets to talk about their takeaways. You can take 1 to 2 minutes on any general comments about time, how you think about time. Then I'm going to ask everybody about the past. What do they think is the proper way of looking at the past? How do you make the most of the present? And then how do you think about the future? So those are the 4 steps. Okay. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to allow people who want to volunteer to go with the takeaways first. So on each of those things. So anybody who wants to talk about their takeaways. So let's start with Judith. You had something about time management. So What are your takeaways? And folks, just line up by typing in exclamation mark to talk about your takeaways. Judith.
I'm sorry, that wasn't supposed to go out to everybody, but oh boy, takeaways. I don't know. I'm still.
I can come back to you. I can come back to you. That's
No,
fine.
no. That's all right. I will say because I had a question and we didn't. I'd like to hear what you would have to say
Sure.
about this. So I was just because we got a little bit onto other things in my group, but I was just wondering, like me, probably I don't understand physics and all that well enough, but the 4 dimensions, right? And I'm just wondering, like, how much of our linear perception of time, past, present, future, is because we are coupled in our bodies to a physical space. But could there be a concept of time without that? And sometimes it just feels like there is. And like if you're in a dream state, time seems very different. So it seems very variable. And I wonder just the way our bodies are made up, that we have this one perception of a linear time. And then just briefly, I don't know, I was just wondering about that, the idea of, premonitions, and where things happen after. It's not happened to me personally, but I don't discount that it happens, that you might have a premonition that something would happen. So I wanted to add that to the topic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So folks, feel free to make observations. You can put questions down. We are going to discuss everything we can about time. So it's going to be David, David S., Jyoti, and Joe next. David.
Sure. Oh, yeah, my video's off. Sorry. So I like the notion, and I may have missed if you presented this at the beginning. The notion, I think it's American, the native cultural view of time, which is you're standing facing time, and what's in front of you is the past, and what's behind you is the future. Because what the future is, you can't see exactly. What the past is, you can see. So the past is what you can know. To some degree, you have actually got a vision of the past, and you can't change it. And the thing you can change, you can't see. So I guess part of the idea is to get a vision of what you would like to have happening, and the fact that we can act, and that the human state is to be able to change the world in some way. That's what time is. It's our offer. It's our relationship to, there's an immediate and there's what's not immediate. There's part we can't change in the past, and there's part we can change. So we have to have we have to form our direction and take that as what we shape ourselves in the universe. It's kind of the same process. So that's what I was thinking about.
Oh, that's profound. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We'll come to that. So this is just great observation. Next up is Jyoti, Joe, and Barry. Jyoti?
Yeah. The past is, for me, it's easy to say. It's for forgetting. It makes you prepared for the present, and the present is going to prepare you for the future. So, but to say that not to think about the past would not be reasonable, because even if you don't want to think about the past, it's in your conscious, it's in your subconscious. It has made you who you are. You have your identity coming from there. However, you don't want to stay stuck in your past, and to stay in, you have to, and sometimes you have to use different tools to disengage your mind from the past. And we were talking about it, such as meditation and physical exercises and what have you. And that anchors you with your present. What was the third question? How do
No, that's
you?
fine. Right now, we are just talking about the takeaways, and then we'll go
Okay.
to all these 4 questions individually. We'll be
Oh,
focused
okay.
on the
So
past.
so the takeaway is you have to stay grounded in the present, because that nothing will come out of going back in the past. But with the same token, because it is with you, if there is some unresolved business that you have left behind, you have to go ahead and resolve it, because it is going to come back and interfere with your present. So that's my takeaway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jyoti. Great observations. Next up is Joe, Barry, David R, Kevin, and Josh. Joe, go ahead.
So I have like a ton of thoughts that are going through my head, and I'm just gonna try and say some of them in a clear and coherent way. But one of the things that I had brought up with our group is the idea of living in the present moment. It's a psychological, approach to being, and the idea of, David actually alluded to it, our ability to change. But in this is our memory and our imagination. And it's interesting because the idea here is it's a mental construct. So that really does distinguish it for me than from the physical aspects of it. So it's our perceptions. And then also how animals, was brought up in our breakup, experience time with circadian rhythms and things along those lines, and how we experience it. And that's a profound difference in how we can actually change things. So that was another thing but there were a couple of other things that how Pascal essentially had seen it, and how Marcus really seen it, the idea of Pascal said something along the lines I remember reading in this, was the idea of that we're imprisoned in the present. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a beautiful way of capturing it, mm-hmm. because it's a mental, again, this is a mental construct. And that to me is really important. The other thing is that time is both subjective and objective. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really important concept to discuss as well going forward, is because it's something that if we're to use a GPS, it's objectively true how we're using it, right? Mm-hmm. Or and then how is it subjective, mm-hmm. right? It's subjective in how we experience it, the phenomenological aspect mm-hmm. of things. So that separation of it as well. Mm-hmm. So there are so many different things. It's such a rich, it's like, your mind goes in so many different directions with trying to even just wrap your head around it. And so those are the things that I'll throw out for now. I had a whole list of things as time as dimension and, and duration, but you had covered all those things. So I'm not going to go into that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. That was great. Next up is Barry, David, Kevin, and Josh. Barry.
Well, I believe time is influenced by how you conceive it. Time is really not real. It's all a perception. I knew a friend of mine that was an engineer, and he was from Nigeria, and they don't even have a concept of time. And he would always be late to meetings, and it affected his career. So it tends on the culture. So I'm going to read the poem that I read last time. It's very short, and it's based on the one T.S. Eliot wrote. It's called Ash Wednesday, and it's based on the spiral staircase. You do the math. Life is not a linear path. It's a spiral, you see. You walk up an incline, you end up behind. Again, you try the same way until you get smart one day. You learn a better way. You spiral up to a new level. That's when you climb, reach higher than your prime. Get wise, my friend, or you'll end where you begin.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you, Barry. Always love your poems. Next up is David, Kevin, Josh, and Paul. David.
So I guess as I was thinking about this, and then through our breakout room, one thought that came to mind about time is when I put it in perspective of the law of attraction, which is where you want to envision where you want to be or what you want to accomplish, which is in your future. And you impress that into your subconscious so that you can then achieve that. And it's kind of an interesting, when you put that in perspective, is you're trying to utilize your present to ask the future to bring something to you as time passes. So it kind of it's quite a dichotomy there. You're thinking, how are you using your present to achieve a future that hasn't existed yet, that you desire?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Great observation. Next up is going to be Kevin, Josh, and Paul. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. I feel time is very personal. Time is the value. How do we perceive it? How do we spend it up to our own value? It's time could be money. For me, the time is the invisible state. It's untouchable. When you think about it, when you think about the moment, it's gone. It become past. Yeah, it's I'm going to share for now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Josh, followed by Paul. Josh?
Yes, hi. I was thinking with the topic of how we deal with the present in time. And it brought to mind you might know of this, it was a famous subject in neuroscience, a man who, because of a well-meaning but botched surgery that affected his temporal lobes, lost all short-term memory. And he was able to function, and he lived for decades afterwards in an institution that he was studied. But the remarkable thing was that he had no concept, he had no short-term memory. So the doctors, for example, who had treated him for 30 years, every morning, it was as he had never known them before. He introduced himself again. And I've been thinking about that because there's a lot of attention, in recent years to the idea of it's psychologically healthy to live in the moment, to not dwell on the past or dwell too much on the future. But then you think, well, what is it actually like to live in a perpetual present with no memories, or where every introduction is brand new? And it's a kind of prison, as someone pointed out. So I don't know where that goes, but I thought it's an interesting thing to think about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead. If anybody else wants to share, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Can't even find the phone to turn it off. Yeah, okay. Facilitating this discussion is great. It's an impossible topic. I love some of the comments, and I want to build on them. That, first of all, I think time is beautiful because it is an illustration of things that guys like Plato said, that everything we experience with our sense perceptions is an illusion. And modern physics just proves it. Like, really, there's a frame of reference, the speed of light, that time goes to essentially zero and mass goes to zero at, and time and space. All those ideas, I won't get into the physics, and that you could actually build a wormhole now, and in some number of years, go back to this moment, by the math at least, with if you had the energy of 100 trillion suns and things like that. But these just prove that our intuitive, the subjective, is way off from the objective. So therefore, let's use the quote unquote illusion, as I think David or Barry put it, that is most productive, which might be the eternal present, because it focuses our attention. The only place that's the most powerful to focus on it now, and even having a memory, is having the memory in the present. There's my best shot. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I like the concept of eternal present. Okay, next up is going to be Andrew, Larry, and Sarika. Andrew.
Yeah, hi. What struck me was something you quoted from James, this idea that the present, cognitively, there's kind of some duration there. You reference something like 12 seconds is maybe the average. I forget exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it just made me wonder if I could practice, like actual practice, expanding my ability to make that duration longer, however that I could do that, that seems like it would be a very enriching experience. It would make your life a richer
Wonderful.
experience. So maybe there is an exercise maybe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. That's I also like William James very much on this one. Next up is going to be Larry, followed by Sarika.
Yeah, as someone said earlier, there is so much here to think about and talk about. But one point is the paradox that we are alive in the present, but our minds are so much of the time either in the past or in the future, which means we are not in the present in which we're actually living. And in Buddhism, which I've spent a fair amount of time with, that's a key and a major concept. And that some of the work is to simply make the attempt somehow to be right now present in the moment. A few people have talked about that, and someone brought up meditation, and the practice of meditation is the attempt without attempting to simply exist right now in the moment, even though we are going in the past and the future don't really exist except in our memories and imagination. And just a second point, you brought this up initially, Shrikant, about artists, and since I am in several of the arts, as I mentioned in my group, so many of the writers and poets, which is a world I'm in, as well as acting and acting Shakespeare, which I talked about, trying to hold on to experience and make it permanent so that when we are gone, we leave something behind. And that's a huge urge amongst so many of the writers and poets. I brought up last name Marcel Proust, the great French novelist. His magnum opus is translated as The Recovery of Lost Time.
Wow. Thank you, Larry. That was excellent. Next up is Sarika, followed by L. Sarika.
So this seems really like poetic, and I was just thinking, sketching some ideas. Like it's interesting, like in science, the time is measured, and the way that it's conceptualized and been measured has changed over time, over the years. And then in religion and Buddhism, they strive to get stillness within time and have a sense of time in that way. And then with art and love, the sense of time is supposed to be that there's an enjoyment, and it's almost like time speeds up. And so, especially like trying to live in the present moment and making the most of our sense of time is more to explore, and hopefully go towards the enjoyment part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarika. That was great. Next up is L. L, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ellen, but I go by L. I think looking at time mathematically is very interesting. I can't cite some books on that, but I started looking at that at sort of the last year of my undergraduate, and I thought that was very interesting. And William James, I think his conceptualization of the present is very, very interesting as well. And I've really enjoyed this, and I'll pass on the rest. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to summarize, or not summarize, but recap what everybody has said, and then we'll go to the next step. And this is just incredible, just the richness of observations shared. Judith talked about to what extent is our concept of time attached to our perception, and what does it look like when it is dissociated from it. David had these fantastic observations about the American Indian facing the past, because normally we think of future as being forward and past as being back, but the American Indians think of it, past because that's what is that you can see that that is unchangeable and future is unknown. He also talked about making clear distinction between what you cannot change. You can't change the past, and using time as a way of changing the world. So that kind of a dynamic view of it. Jyoti talked about very interesting things about the need to forget the past in order to prepare for the present and the future on one hand. At the same time, dealing with the unresolved issues in the past as being a requirement for moving ahead. At the same time, you can't get stuck in your past, and you have to remain grounded in the present. So I thought that that was a very nuanced and very good view of the past and present. Joe talked about living in the present and the Pascal's concept of being imprisoned in the present and realizing that the time is a mental construct. Made the distinction between objective time and subjective time. And that's a huge issue because most the physicists mostly focused on the objective time, but we saw William James kind of begin to explore the subjective conception of time. Barry talked about his famous concept of the spiral, and I find spiral very interesting because it's a combination of a circle and a straight line. So it is a circle in the sense that there is a time where there is an aspect of time where there are these cycles. There's a day, there is a month, not a month, but day, a year. We go through cycles. We get up, we go to sleep. So there are cycles in our life. At the same time, there is a direction, or we're trying to go somewhere. If it is only a circle, then you're not going anywhere. So I think spiral captures, and the way in which Barry puts it, that if you're on the spiral staircase, you can see forward and you can see where you are and you can see backwards at the same time in an integrated way. David talked about the law of attraction and how it is all about impressing future in your mind, kind of absorbing it so that it becomes real to you in the present. That helps you bring the future to you. Kevin talked about the fact that the time is personal, that, what is time to you? Is it money? Is it something else? And you have to make that call. Josh talked about living in the moment and what actual perceptual present, real present looks like if you lose the memory. Paul talked about, the concept of the eternal present. Andrew asked a very interesting question of this observation that William James has about the 12-second duration, your conception of duration. Can you actually expand it? And what happens if you expand it? Is it possible? And what happens if you did? If you had a slightly longer conception of present, what would it do for you? I think that's really intriguing. Larry talked about the fact that, we live in the present, but most of the time our mind is stuck in the past or the future. And the entire practice of meditation is about living in the present. Free ourselves from being too focused on the past or the future. He also talked about the desire of all artists to immortalize, to leave something behind. Sarika talked about the stillness, and she talked about this interesting concept of that when you are enjoying yourself, time speeds up. So the notion of the speed of time, speed of passage of time, varies based on your experience. Elle talked about, the value of William James and his perception, his conceptualization of duration. So this is just fantastic observations. Now, what I want to do is I want to do one more pass now First, at the easiest part, which I think is the easiest part, which is the past. How do you think about the past? What is the proper way of thinking about the past? Any thoughts about the past? So we're going to start with Sarika. Sarika, go ahead.
So I wanted to circle back to what Jyoti had said about the need for resolution and tying that to meditation and being stillness. Some of my readings on meditation, like Tara Brach and Caroline Myss have said about radical acceptance and radical understanding. Sometimes when I'm meditating, I'll think of things that happened in the past and I'll be very upset. And then I don't understand how to be present because I'm stuck in the past. So I think what Jyoti was saying about how we need to make some resolution, I don't know, through understanding ourselves or making peace, and in that way, finding some sort of stillness. So when I think about the past, I'm still struggling to really understand what meditation is and how to really be compassionate and get to that stillness. But I think, resolution might be something.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sarika. Next up is going to be Linda. Anybody else who wants to talk about how they look at the past? You can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Linda, you're next.
We talked about the past being a basis for the present and future, but the other issue came up that how we interpret the past varies. One of our members discussed that there were even studies done that with someone recounting a past event that over a period of time, they recounted it differently. So we actually have a kind of hazy perception of the past when you look at it that way. And in terms of times in the past for a global basis, we've changed that story over and over again. The same past is rewritten every so many years, it seems. So I found that fascinating that we see the past, differently, depending on remembering it.
Thank you. Next up is Claudio. Claudio, go ahead.
So the question is how the appropriate way we view the past. We should view the past. Well, the past can be overwhelming because that's all we have, right? Because the present is a fleeting moment. The future is unknown. It hasn't occurred yet. So we have an entire history of past from youth to present. And the older you are, the more you have of the past. So it's unavoidable. However, I think it's important not to realize that, not to dwell too much upon the past. Because like one of your previous speakers said, you can become stuck in the past, and then it's going to prevent you from moving forward. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio. Next up is going to be Cotton, Barry, Laura, and Kevin. Cotton.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had a lot of audio issues. So basically, I didn't get to input it earlier, but I'll talk about the past. But
no, but you're welcome. If by the way, anybody wants to do general comments, go ahead. You can make general comments too, and then continue on past. Go ahead.
My concept of time, and this is one of my most interesting topics, but my concept of time is continuous collection of data. Like it's a split second, it's not even a second. I don't know what the measurement is, just like collection, it's happening, collect data is all over the place in whatever form, concurrent, sequential, there's no order. So the way I conceptualize time is when you actually think about a span of time that's a little bit wider than that little constant collection. That's what I call this, like the measurement, the experience. Let's just call it maybe the vessel is like space. So you have like, give me 1 minute. I mean, you have 1 minute of time that you can think about, reflect upon. And so for me, the past is like, you do the same kind of sweep. You select a slice of time from that already occurred from the data. So you get a little bit like 5 minutes or 10 years worth of time that you're examining in your head. But now that's the past. But future is the data hasn't been collected yet, or maybe your mind is not keeping up. Maybe it's already right. There's nothing of going forward chronologically. It can go vertically, it can go in a vortex, whatever form. But that's how I think of it, So
Interesting. So it's collection of data. Okay, very nice. Thank you, Kajin.
Sure.
Next up is Barry, Laura, Kevin, Joe, and Judith. Barry, go ahead.
Well, I look at the past in practical terms. I look for patterns. First, if I feel anxious about something, I look into my past to see if there were similar things that made me anxious, and what I did in the past that ended up different than what I was anxious about. And for instance, if I'm going to make a presentation and I'm getting anxious about it, in the past I made 8 presentations to as much as 850 people, and I made a mistake, and I got out of it by having an overhead projector to go along with a slide projector. So I found strategies that and plans that counter the mistakes I might make or things I might not have control. So I call that pattern looking. So I think you can use past to alleviate emotional reactions to the future, like anxiety and fear of the future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. Great observations. Next up is going to be Laura, Kevin, and Joe. Laura.
Okay, 2 things. I think, talk about the circle of life. I think we're more like a quadratic equation, where we kind of walk up to our peak kind of slowly. Time is slow. I remember when I was a kid and I was complaining, my mother said, don't worry, it'll go much faster when you get older. And now when we get to that peak, it goes really fast down, and it's all a blur. And it goes so freaking fast, it's ridiculous to get, so that's what I have to say about time for whatever it is.
Wonderful.
And I have no concept of it anymore. And it's not just of the pandemic, it's been like this for a while. Anyway, the other side of it is in my world, which is a very peculiar world. My past is something I'm not supposed to think about because I can't be that person anymore. And it makes me feel bad that I'm so limited now. On the other hand, that part of, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so I have to leave that alone and I have to live in the present, but I'm constructing the present more or less. I mean, I have ideas about things, I put things together, but I do have a lack of memory. And so, but it's in and out, and we talked about it, it's all kinds of confusion, and I can't think about the future because that then also, I don't think I know what I'm going to get to. So it's all to me, it's very difficult to talk about any of these entities.
Got it.
So to me, it's a hodgepodge of time, and it just goes fast. That's all I'm going to say about time.
Got it. Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate that. How perception changes over time, over age. Next up is Kevin, Joe, and Judith. Kevin.
Yeah, this time I'm going to use punctuation metaphor. Past is period, the present is semicolon, the future is comma. The past shows our pattern. It could help us find the trend for the future. The history could repeat itself. Can we experience this better if we, make less mistake for individual as a group or as country or as a whole human being? The tools we've made in the past is not powerful as today, even more powerful in the future. Those tools could make our future better, also could destroy ourselves. So that's something I
Wonderful.
would share. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Joe, Judith, and David. Joe, go ahead.
So actually, Laura pretty much had taken what I was going to say with the idea of how we experience time with our memories, in the sense that when we're younger, it takes so much longer. It feels like, a year. If you say a year to somebody that's 8 years old, and if you say a year to somebody that's 50 years old, the experience and the reactions are just so different. And it seems to things that like kind of go shorter and shorter as we, that's the way I think of the past sometimes, is the way we're actually going through and thinking about it. And there's another thought I did have that is escaping me at the moment, but it was
That's fine.
actually,
You
yeah,
can come
sorry
back.
about
If
it.
you
Was
think of
actually,
it, you can type another exclamation mark.
thank you. It was actually it was good too.
Okay. It will come back. Next up is Judith, David, Jyoti, Andrew, Josh, and Paul. So Judith.
Yeah, so that's interesting what Joe and Laura were saying about, how time seems faster when you're older. But I'm just thinking about that too now with what I was about to say anyway, is that, well, children are very in the present. They really don't care much what happened yesterday. They're not really thinking much about their future. Maybe that's why, maybe because when we get older, which is what I wanted to address, was the fact that, there are people that spend a lot of time just mulling over the past in maybe you could say an unhealthy way, but clearly there's something that they need to resolve. So then in that case, they do need to do that. But, you can also use your past to look for all the insights of, the lessons, how to live, how not to live. But you also have to look to the future. The future is important because you want to, we all have need for purpose, I think, and maybe children don't, again, so maybe that's why time is different for them. But as adults, we always seek purpose, and even more so as we get older. And we come to the end, we're looking for what meaning did my life have? What should I do now to give it more meaning? So it's a little bit of both, and I think we do need to do both as adults anyway, and then maybe sometimes we have to just be children and play a little bit, but that's probably part of the balance also. So that's all.
Thank you, Judith. Great observations. Next up is David, Jyoti, and Andrew. David, go ahead. David S.
Okay, yeah. So about the right attitude to the past, that's sort of thinking about that. And I maybe start in Pascal's camp that you can look at, our structure of existing is in the now, or in a certain sense imprisoned in the now. But our now is not a flat thing. It has a structure. So here's the past, part of the structure of now. So you're asking, what's the right attitude towards that part of the structure of now? Our present contains this thing, this past. So, and as it's been said, apparently it's not something constant. As we review it, like anything else that's present, it reveals more and more things. So now it looks like the past has a hidden part and a not hidden part, just like anything does. So there's an appearance of the past, and there's the unknown part of the past and the known part of the past. And just like anything in the present, it's revealed to us through different ways. Like Barry said, we've noticed that certain things we experienced, the narrative didn't have the consequence we thought. So we learned this changes the way we look at our decision. This changes our past. And we also change our past through other people's reflection on it. And even my reflection on it as another person now, I'm a new person now, looking back, that gives me a new perspective on my past. So yes, the past has to evolve. Well, why am I going through all this? What is the right attitude towards the past? So I think, again, to me, it has to do with the future is the thing we're heading towards. That is the thing where the last speaker just mentioned purpose. So as I said, it got about pressing on the world, changing the world. Somehow the past is like we're surfers in time, and it is the great gift. It's our given. It's what we have now. That if we look at it right, everything we've got to work with is already, being handed to us. We're surfing, and the wave is pushing us. We can do a lot of things. We have a lot of choices about where to go with it. But it's that gift that's given, and it's up to us to have the fullest, truest knowing of our past, realizing that our perceptions are affected by our limiting our own perceptions and our opening to full perceptiveness. So that's
wow. That's amazing. Thank you, David. Next up is Jyoti, Andrew, and Josh. Jyoti.
Yeah, the way I look at my past is like a film that's going on in my head. It had various phases, various different episodes. Some episodes were very pleasant, and some were very traumatic. The first phase was full of development. When I was developing as a child, I was learning. I was very motivated. I was forming my personality, and everything was good. It seemed it was very good, and then it was stressful. There were exams I had to pass, the tough ones, choose a career, and become somewhat self-reliant. Then I got married, and I had to start another course of development because I was an immigrant. So that taught me something about myself, my coping skills, my adaptive skills, and what have you, and had some very good days, very good years. I loved it. I enjoyed it. So they were the pleasant years. And then things started to go down a little bit, not financially, but in my personal life. And then the last episode was that of zigzag confusion of a caregiver. And I learned a lot about myself during those 8 years. And they were teachings. They were teachings I learned. And I brought them in the present. And I learned that present has to be enjoyed. Present needs to be lived through. Present is the most important thing in my life. That's because of what I had before. So past was not to me a waste. Past was very crucial part of my development. And I feel that there, here and there, I will go into, grieving, and I will feel sad about losing my husband. Then I will say, oh, what did I learn? What did I learn out of it? And the learning was be in peace all the time, and just take one moment, one day at a time, and stay very healthy so that you can take care of yourself and not depend on anybody. So I think in my view, the past has been, like I said, up and down, but I'm very, very pleased in general that the past brought me to a point that I can now live with myself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jyoti. That was great. Next up is Andrew. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, so thinking about the past, again, in the context of this of duration, I just was thinking about this and I thought, okay, so the past is everything before now. So the question is, what's now? And it occurred to me that what I consider now is kind of based on a task almost, or what you're doing now. Kind of it's about doing. So, for example, being part of this discussion, I almost consider the past before we started this discussion. So it's not 12 seconds, it's not 60 seconds, it's really before this event started. So it's kind of, which suggests that time can be broken up kind of on a, almost like on a task basis, how you discretize it. So the lesson to me there is stay engaged and continue to do things so that you're more in the present, I guess.
You're muted, Shrikant.
You're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Sorry about that. Next up is going to be Josh, followed by Paul. Josh?
Yes, hi. I think one thing I was thinking about the past is we tend to have this conception of the past as fixed, sort of like a photograph or a video. But I think, in fact, and I think there's been a lot of research into this, we're constantly, the past is really inseparable from memory. And even our own personal past, we're constantly rewriting it. It's like a film that we are editing every day, you know. There's not a fixed reality to it. So in a way, there's a malleable quality to it as much as there is of, you know, our imagination about the future.
Wonderful. Great observations. Thank you, Josh. Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, as I think Shakira said, acceptance is what I want to focus on, but I think in the present, there's a chance to change things now. But if one takes the argument that human consciousness grows through the practice of acceptance, you can frame the whole past as an opportunity to practice acceptance because of the unchangeability of it. And you can say, you can practice not changing the past, but changing your frame around the past. So you take your present filter and say, oh, my dad wasn't trying to hurt me, he was trying to teach me something. So that's how the constant reframe happens. But then there's this acceptance part it's there to teach us. Someone died, you know. So that's my thought.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to summarize or recap what everybody has said, and then we'll go to the present. Sarika talked about the need for resolution, that you need to resolve things in order to leave them behind, to make past truly past, otherwise it dominates your present. Linda talked about how do you conceive the past. Claudia talked about that past is all that we have, so it is actually quite a dominant part of us, and we kind of have to free ourselves from that inertia at some point. Cotton talked about it very interestingly as collection of data, you know, looking at time itself as collection of data. Barry talks about the use of past as seeing patterns in the past in order to solve problems in the present and to deal with the future. Laura and Joe talked about how perception of time changes with age, how children look at time and how adults look at time, and when you come to older age, how the perception changes. Kevin had this interesting point about past being a period, present being a semicolon, and future being a comma. Judith brought up the beautiful point about children and how children's perception of time is different from adults, how they are living in the present, they hardly have a concept of future. She also talked about the unhealthy mulling about the past. David had this interesting concept of the structure of now, the distinction between hidden past and revealed past. Also, I particularly like the point that, future is where we are going. And the past kind of evolves. It is the great gift that we are given. And you kind of have to use that gift in order to go in the future. So I really like that perspective on how you approach the past. Jyoti also talked about the past in a very interesting way. Firstly, she divided it into different stages. It's not like a continuous time. It's like different stages. And that past is not a waste. It is part of your development that you have to respect and accept. And once you do that, present has to be lived in. Andrew had a very interesting concept of the now being task-based. I think it's a very interesting point that now, for example, for him is this meetup. Josh was pointing out that the past is malleable. Our brain is continuously rewriting the memories. We are rewriting the past. It's not a fixed thing. And Paul talked about the importance of acceptance of the past and the ability that we have of reframing the past. So next up, let's look at the present. How do you make the most of the present? Okay, so that's the question on the table. How do you make the most of the present? What is your attitude towards the present? So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to say something. So we'll start with Cotton. Cotton, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry not to get so excited, but this is such an exciting topic. For me, the present is like the unsung hero. It's always taken granted of, you know. The past is romantic, out of reach. Future is exciting, out of reach. But the present is right in front of us all the time. Yet it also is so fleeting, so evident that it eludes us constantly. And it's like one of the hardest thing is to be mindful. I don't want to use the word mindful, but to notice the present. And even now, right now, I'm not noticing anything. I'm just talking. But let's you know, pay attention to the present. I think that's going to be a good exercise.
Thank you. Thank you, Kajan. That was great. Next up is Kevin, Joe, and Jyoti. Kevin.
We split the time in three stages: present, past, present, future. Only actionable time is now, present. It's the most important of the period. It's a state. It's gone very quickly. So we have this important thing. How can we use it? So use the time wisely. The structure of time is like 3 layers, right? Can we doing better than the moment? Today, this year, this term? Do we understand ourselves in the past is enough? What's we missing? What lessons learned in the past? I would use, especially these days, use a lot of technology can do the mathematical module. Use what if? If we do it different, what we can learn? We talk about this side or this theory, this society not bad. Let's see if we do different, what what's the outcome? So here's what are we doing now? What's the plan for it in the past? Right? What's the bottom line here? It is inclusive, not just benefit for ourselves, also help others as a human being as a whole. That's question for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great observations. Next up is Joe, Jyoti, Laura, and Claudio. Joe.
So at a very basic level, the idea that all we have is the present moment, and that is the only thing that is real, that means that there's an awareness. So the first thing is that, and most importantly, is that you're aware that that's real, and that's all that you can change. I think that the other part about of it as well is the idea of acceptance of the present moment. And so that is a critical thing as far as psychologically. You have to be present, and you have to accept where you are and what can be done. So those are two psychological concepts that you have to be, one, aware, and the other is accept.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Jyoti, Laura, Claudio, and Sarika. Jyoti.
Present should be made the most beautiful phase of your life, because whatever has happened has happened. You had no control over it, and you cannot bring back a lot of things that went wrong. You can fix them. So you have now present to live, and you have to focus on yourself, your growth, your personal development, and explore the neighborhood that you live in. Start slowly, start around you, get to know the people, get to do some charity work, read, and participate. Like my participation in this group over here, for instance, is very gratifying to me. It makes me feel good that I have now the time, and I have the motivation, and I have the curiosity to live with the times. And every day we are learning new here, something new. I'm able to speak my mind. So to me, the present, why my present seems so lovely to me is because for 8 years or whatever the span of time that I was engaged in, all these things are missing. So when you have missed something in your life, then you treasure when you get it. So I think the present should be the best time of your life, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you very much. Next up is Laura, Claudio, Sarika, Mushki, and Judith. Laura, go ahead.
I think the present every day is a challenge. And it's all the elements that everybody's talking about. Because you don't know what's going to happen. There's hundreds of things that could happen. Much of what Joe is talking about is how I feel about it. So that's how I feel about the present.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is Claudio. Claudio, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I believe that we should engage in the present by including the past and the future simultaneously, like all three of them. So you consider the past when engaging in the present, so you won't repeat the same mistakes, and considering the future based on your present actions. So you need to think of the future consequences of your actions. So that's what I mean. So avoiding past mistakes and considering about future consequences based on the present moment. That's
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Claudio. That was great. Next up is going to be Sarika, Mushki, Judith, and Barry. Sarika, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Cotton had said that the present is the unsung hero is probably one of the most beautiful things I've heard in a really long time. It's really, really profound and impactful. And yeah, the present, being mindful, I think personally coming out of like some kind of trauma that I'm experiencing. And as I'm coming out of it, noticing also from like a neurological perspective, how to be present as I like experience in my mind, like certain tightnesses leaving regions of my brain that may have correlated with spatiotemporal, all these things. And yeah, so being present is difficult, and the acceptance and the connection and just keep trying to be positive. Hopefully things will get better.
Thank you, thank you, Sarika. Thank you. Next up is Mushki, Judith, Barry, Andrew, Brian, David S, and David R. Mushki, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So someone mentioned, I think it was Kevin, that the moment you think about it, like as soon as you think about a moment, the moment is gone. I find that very profound. So I think the moment cannot be experienced on the level of the mind. I think it's best experienced through the five senses, using all five senses. So when we're walking, what does the feet feel like on the ground? What does the sun feel like on me? Even washing dishes, what does it feel like, the warm water on the hands? What does the soap smell like? As soon as you start to think about the moment, it's already the next moment. The moment is gone. Experience being instead of thinking, which is a form of doing, is how to be in the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mushki. Next up is going to be Judith, Barry, and Andrew. Judith, go ahead.
I like what you just said, Mushki. I like really experiencing the five senses at any given time. It's really because we have all these five senses. So I really enjoy when I actually pay attention to that and take that all in. But what I wanted to say is also, I liked what Sarika said, because I also felt Cotton's, she was praising Cotton. I love the way Cotton opened up about being mindful. And I liked her choice of word mindful. I think a lot of times we are really busy doing things. We're either really busy doing things and we're on autopilot doing something that we've set up in our mind somewhere for the future, but we're really not paying attention. So, to the choice we're making at that moment, we're sitting behind the wheel in the car or whatever it is to get to work, So being mindful just means like holding past and future, but the action that you're taking at that time for those choices that you've made all in parallel, maybe, being present with what you've chosen to do at that moment. And the other ways besides being, on autopilot is we sometimes numb ourselves, with people numb themselves with drugs or TV. They don't, You know, they're either stuck in the past or thinking about the past or trying not to think about it. So future and past, you know, can be a problem if they're driving our present so that we no longer are present. So that's the value of present. It's the most valuable. And whatever Catton said, I would just like to, you know, if I could repeat it, I would. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Great observations. Next up is going to be Barry, Brian, David S., and David R. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to follow up with what Claudio said, if that's his name, Claudio Galaxy. I'm very passionate about this because I'm Scottish Irish, and I'm from the clan Kennedy, and on their badge or their coat of arms is the following motto: "Avise de fin," and that means consider the end. And Stephen Covey, in his 7 Habits of Effective People, said, before you begin something, consider the end. So in the present, before you eat that food, before you drink that drink, before you say that word, before you walk that path, before you go to this situation, consider the ultimate end, because whatever you sow, you shall reap.
Wow. Wow. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Barry. That was great. Next up is Brian, David S., and David R. Brian.
Well, to put it simply, the present is where I live, where things happen. The past is only memories and the future is only unknown always.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Next up is David S.
Yeah, what Barry was saying was making me realize that I was sort of thinking about the present and the future together. Really hard to talk about being in the present without having talked about being about the whole future yet, about where we would like to direct ourselves, because the living in the present, you want to establish your balance, you want to set your direction, but that means you've sort of already dealt with the future in some way, because, you know, what does it matter which way you face right now if you haven't given yourself an intention? So I was looking at it. So if living is this art of making the beautiful future, so I'm looking at the future and the ends, the way Barry was saying, you know, I have to have some idea of the future. So I'm being in the present to act the right way and to connect to what I'm doing in the full way. So I want all the presence people have talked about, all the immediacy in the moment, but I have to be bringing myself into it in that sort of fearless way. So I'm simultaneously acting and receiving at the same time, right? But it's a creative thing. So I want to bring in the idea of it has to involve love, it has to involve beauty and our ideals. It's not totally passive, right? So I'm just having trouble sorting the future out of that process. It seems to be really I wish we talked about the future first. Okay.
We'll do so in the future. Next up is going to be David R. And Josh. David, go ahead.
So Shrikant, very interesting. As I was listening to everyone talk, it impressed upon me as I was thinking about the present. The present for me, I think, is my pivot point. I pivot from the moment to the future to the past. And it's the ability to rapidly transition and pivot in the moment, in your present, to be able to draw upon the past, the future, or the experiences that are occurring at that instant. So I look at maybe the present is where you pivot from. Wonderful. And you pivot according to where your attention is drawn at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Josh, followed by Andrew. Josh.
Yes, I think several people alluded to this when you talk about meditation, which is really just, attention to the present. Why it's so difficult to do. I think one of the reasons is that we're a little afraid of it because the present by nature is uncertain. And we want to have certainty. We want to know what happened in the past. We want to know what the future holds. And to live with that uncertainty, which is what the present is, I think is uncomfortable and it's difficult. And I think it's why meditation is both important and hard to do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. Next up is Andrew, and then I'm going to recap everything, and then we're going to the future. Andrew.
Yeah, a couple of things here. This brings me back to the earlier discussion about, the past and this idea of time discretization and it being based on what you're doing now. What do I want to say? So basically, the present is that thing that you're doing now, right? So one thing that I know I run into, if you narrow your definition of the present, you're constantly regretting and replanning where you are in your life. What did I do, that's affecting me now? What should I change, to make things better? Kind of like this pivot point that this previous book speaker mentioned. The idea is to get away from the pivot point, make it kind of a wider kind of beam that you're resting upon. And so if you make a broader definition for your task, right? The task being now, turn it into your entire life, and then you're always in the present, right? But and I mean that quite literally, not figuratively. But also the thing about being on task, if you want to make your the present moment of longer duration, you need to pay attention, right? I mean, it kind of gets back to that. So if you pay attention to something, then you're focusing on a task, right? That task becomes longer in duration. So it's all kind of intertwined, right? Attention and kind of a task-based discretization time. It could bring you some peace, and it's kind of similar to meditation, right? It's very focused.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so I'm going to now recap everything. Cotton opened this up amazingly with present as being the unsung hero, and the importance of noticing the present, paying attention to it. I do think that attention is really the heart of kind of human ability. And so I think attention is the big concept. William James, by the way, he has amazing things to say about attention. And it's not surprising that he has also very good things to say about the time and the duration and of the present as being the foundation. Kevin pointed out that the only actionable time we have is now. Joe also repeated that all we have is the present. And it's all about kind of awareness and acceptance. Jyoti said that present is the most beautiful part of your life, so treasure it. Laura talked about kind of the unknowns from day to day, from moment to moment. Claudia talked about the present incorporating both future and the past, kind of looking into the future for consequences and past to learn. Sarika had a very interesting observations about the kind of spatial temporal experience of the present, the tightness you notice in your body where you're kind of stuck. So that it's not it's also a physical, visceral experience of the present. Mushki also talked about the kind of sensory base of the present, of how your feet feel on the ground, how you're tasting something as being the way to connect to the present. Judith talked about the fact that, most of us are on autopilot most of the time, not paying attention, and that we numb ourselves. Barry talked about his amazing motto of his clan. Before you begin, consider the end, of being, kind of focused on the future and aiming the present at the future. Brian, simply said, present is where I live. David had this amazing set of observations where he's saying that it's really the future. It's not a passive experience of experiencing, but it's all about active. Where would you like to direct yourself? And talked about the art of making beautiful future. He acknowledged that all the value of immediacy that everybody is talking about is important, but you have to be oriented towards the future. David R. talked about the present being the pivot point of being able to rapidly transition. Josh talked about the value of meditation as a way of getting to the present, and that there is a tendency we have of being afraid of the present, being running away from it into the future and the past. And the meditation is a practice to bring your attention back gently to the present. Andrew talked about present is what you're doing now, and talked about kind of the sharpness or bluntness of the now, and the value of changing that, changing that duration of what you're considering now. So it's just, amazing range of observations. So now we are on to the future. How do you think about the future? How do you think you should think about the future? So it's about the future. So any thoughts? Welcome any thoughts on the future. How do you think about the future? We'll start with Judith. Judith, go ahead.
Future is really important. Future is the motivator. Future is what distinguishes us to a large extent from other animals. I mean, they prepare for their futures too, but humans really can dream and imagine things, and then they can create their present based on those dreams and their imagination. So I think that's the value of future for individuals and for societies.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Andrew.
Yeah, it just occurs to me. I think the future, for me, the future is the real source of the suffering, because it's constantly about contemplating, okay, what do I need to improve in my life? What am I not doing good enough now? In the future, I'm going to plan to make things better. So this whole idea of wanting to be better and make life richer, and yada, 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 planning for the future, it really is a source of suffering, because it leads to a sense of, that you're not good enough now. And I just find it really brings us, it's a source of suffering for me.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Paul, followed by Cotton. Paul.
Yeah, and this beautiful conversation, meditation comes up so much. So that's what I feel like giving a new frame on in this group to think about, I think, which is thinking about the future is thinking. thinking about the past is thinking. And here's the kicker, even thinking about your breath going in and out is thinking. So there's a form of meditation where I think one way to call it is you develop the observer self. And all of those thought thinkings, maybe it's the default network in neuroscience like monkey mind, or maybe it's planning a future graduation, or maybe it's a past trauma, or it's thinking about your breath going in and out. They're all at the same level. And you just do what Joe talked about, is be pure awareness. And those things just pass by. And then the future doesn't have a different weight than the past as you're in your meditation. It's all just wispy things passing by. You're in pure awareness. There's my thought.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be Cotton, Joe, and Barry. Cotton.
Hi. So please forgive me because I'm going to use the side of my brain that's on the musical side, not the science brain. So for me, and first of all, I thank this meetup because I haven't really thought about this at all, but based on what everyone has said, it just kind of sprouted. So it's kind of fresh idea from tonight. So I just say the future is like an empty canvas. Anything is possible, even the stars. It is creativity incarnate. Do not use fear and repeated mistakes as your paintbrush. Paint your dreams.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Cotton. Next up is Joe and Barry. Joe.
The future and the past have something in common, and that is that, that they're fixed. There's no change that can occur in them. So there's also the aspect of the psychological aspect of it, in the sense that there's a saying that if you live in the past, you're depressed. If you live in the future, you're anxious. And if you live in the present, that you're happy. So I think that there's just this element of understanding, of what is in your control and what is not. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a really important psychological concept for us. The physics aspect of it, I won't go into though. But I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Barry.
Well, this subject I wrote in my journal today, so it's really up to date. My future is to master the piano, master painting, master yoga, master poetry. I want to master the power flow of my mind. And I believe the way you do this is through flow. So my future is to have more flow in my life. And so I'm planning on New Year's Day having a couple of lobster and bubbly for dinner. But I'm at the same time, I'm working on my will because my wife passed away and I have to revise it. So I'm going to die eventually, and I want to think about what I want to leave and who I want to leave it to. So there is short range and long range future, and I think it's good to have plans to improve yourself, because the one that improves himself lives longer, happier, and healthier.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. Next up is going to be Kevin, Linda, Jyoti, and Claudio. Kevin.
If let's say we consider the now is a hero of time, obviously consider past is mother of a hero. The future would be son of a hero. As hero, we need to set up the expectation for our future, such as what's the purpose, goal, or value, or belief. And we are a hero for ourselves. It's also for the community. We not only make ourselves to enjoy the happy moment, also help others. And also I share would be the pattern in the past has already indicated some clue of our future. If past is suffering, act it now with hope for your future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Linda, Jyoti, Claudio, and David.
I think through our past and the present, we've already created much of the future, but I think how one views the future can vary a great deal on age. I think as we age, there's an element of fear that gets added to how we view the future. Aging comes with physical infirmities many times and mental too. It's more difficult to be happy about the future when you're afraid that that's going to be a shorter period of time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda. Great observations. Next up is Jyoti, Claudio, and David. Jyoti.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to laugh at me. I don't plan the future because in my life, everything has fallen in my lap. If I'm going in the left direction, suddenly it will veer off and come in the right. But what will fall in my lap won't be bad. So my husband, late husband, and I planned for our future because he knew he was going to die. So he left me in a good situation here. So I am not going to think every day about what's going to happen in the future because that's all. He lived in future. He did not live in the present. He lived in the future. So I don't want to live in the future because even if I plan my future, it's not going to happen that way. And things are going to be different. And like Linda said, we are at the aging takes lots of things away from you. So you don't want to plan something in different direction. You just want to live every day, one day at a time, and just try to be at peace and enjoy the nature. I mean, that's the best thing you can do at my age. Enjoy the nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is Claudio, followed by David. Claudio.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I hope we have, this has been fascinating. I hope we have another meeting regarding time. There's so much to discuss. It's very fascinating. Yes, regarding the future, let me talk very briefly about the past. It's important that we do not obsess with the past, do not dwell upon past events, especially the negative ones and that are long time ago, because you cannot change the past. It's fixed, right? So you're wasting your time, you can become depressed. That likewise in the future, do not become fixated on things that are out of your control. For example, your inevitable death. We're all in the same boat, right? No sense in dwelling upon all the goods that we're going to miss after we're dead for like billions of years, you know. So it's okay to think about the past and the future, but do not become obsessed with either one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Next up is David. David, go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes, David asked.
Yeah, sorry. So this right attitude is trying to find out how many ways there are to look at the future and what the right attitude is. So the future being our visualization of where we could arrive and what we could seek to become or head into. The future is something, again, it's like a part of the structure of the present, but it's something we learned about because of our past. Our knowledge that there's a future comes from having done things and arrived here. And some of those things worked really well for us and some of those didn't. And we have tried, we have acted, we've had things, and we've loved, and everything we've had has changed and come and gone, a lot of unpredictability, and that we know that's shaping the future because we've seen the past turned that way, and that's how we're saying what's coming. So as part of our present, it's our room, it's like what was said, it's our room to pivot, knowing that we're not just stuck here. There's stuff coming and we have to face and direct as best we can ourselves towards what it is we're going to choose. And we have to find out where we're going to direct ourselves to get anywhere near what we want. So, somehow we've got the values we've been building from the past in order to paint that future. That's our making art in the future. So how do you do art? You have to have a degree of control. of your emotions, of your tools, of your paints, of your music, of your hands, of the way you hear, so that you can make those sounds again. So it's a matter of, we've learned how to practice, and we've done the work in practicing. And so we figured out from the past how we have to live now in order to navigate. So I guess, you know, our ability to use our past is our future. That we are not our past, but we have an ability to use it to, again, like surfing, you know, to turn the board to, and how many things we can reach for, even that we haven't done, but we've learned what our skills are really maybe even capable of. So we have a grasp beyond, because we've learned what the future is.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me go ahead and recap first. Judith talked about the future as being really important, the hallmark of human beings. It as being the source, you know, Andrew talked about as it as being the source of suffering, you know, pointing to insufficient present. Paul talked about, you know, being of pure awareness, where, you know, past, present, and future are kind of seen equally. Cotton was very poetic. She said, you know, there is an empty canvas, paint your dreams. Joe talked about, you know, if you're obsessed with the past, you're depressed. If you're obsessed with the future, you're anxious. And you can be happy in the present. Barry talked about mastering the flow of your mind, and more flow, and need to have plans to improve yourself. Kevin talked about the present as being the hero and future as being the son of hero. Linda talked about the fear that comes with age. Jyoti talked about that she doesn't plan because things have, you know, kind of fall into her lap, and it's all about being at peace with herself. And that's being the most important thing in this stage of her life. Claudia talked about not dwelling on the past, not fixated on the future, and doing the things you can do, you know, not fretting about things that you can't change. David had a whole bunch of really interesting observations on future as being what could be, the fact that we learn from the past to launch ourselves into the future, present as giving you a room to pivot, and present as being the start of the future. Again, the notion of, you know, where are we going to direct ourselves? He talked about future as making art and developing a degree of control, degree of ability to do that. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation. It's pretty incredible, you know, to have so many thoughtful people with such deep thoughts. I mean, this is exactly the tradition. This is exactly the goal of the Great Conversation, where you start by putting on the table, taking in all the great ideas of the past. But it is not about the ideas of the past. It is the ideas about the future as processed in the present. So you take in everything that the past, again, you know, we're talking about the Great Conversation. We're talking about all these thoughts of the past, which are the launching pad for this conversation. So that is a rich launching pad. So you kind of have to learn all the past, your own as well as that of civilization, because that gives you the right starting point. But the purpose of it is not the reverence of the past, but to look forward. And it is amazing to see what we've been able to do in the present here in this now, as Andrew calls it, in this now of this meetup. So thank you so much, everybody. This has been a tremendous honor and tremendous pleasure, and hope to see you soon. Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.